well, please.
We're live, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, good morning, Borodar Pab. Welcome to this joint scrutiny session. Today we've got one main item to scrutinise, but before we come on to that, can I ask, please, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. We've got apologies from Anwin Orrells. We've got apologies from Councillor Carol Robinson. We've got apologies from Councillor Lucy Roberts, apologies from Cabinet Member Pete Roberts, Cabinet Member Richard Church, Cabinet Member Sandra Davis. We've also got apologies from Diane Reynolds and Jane Thomas and Sharon Powell.
Thank you. Has anyone got any interests to disclose? Can't see any hands. Anyone a party whip? Oh, anyone received a whip on anything? Nope. Okay, right. So the main item is the Corporate Strategic and Equality Plan performance of Q3. So welcome everyone to scrutiny. This is the first joint scrutiny that I've chaired, so please bear with me. It's the largest meeting that I've chaired online as well, so that's always fairly interesting. But yeah, welcome to committee. Thank you, officers, for attending, and thank you to the portfolio holders for being here as well. And on that note, I think I'm going to hand straight over to the leader, Councillor James Gibson-Watt, to introduce this item, please. And please bring in officers, Catherine James and any other officers when you feel you need to, James. And it would be great if we could have a short presentation from you and officers on the background to this report and just your key headlines and key themes that you've been looking at in relation to this quarter.
Diolch yn fawr, Chair. Just to check, you can hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, fine. Borodar, and welcome to this meeting, all, as you say, a large meeting with lots of members and a significant number of officers. Just to say that Councillor Pete Roberts will join us when he can. He's currently in a meeting at Gwynedd High School, but will join as soon as that's finished. So it's sort of partial apology, if you like. As members can see, this is to scrutinise and review the Q3 performance, which, as ever with these things, is retrospective, looking back at the period, the last 3 months of last year, October to December 24. And as you're well aware, the invitation is to review the performance of the authority against the objectives and actions within the Corporate and Strategic Equality Plan. If I just say corporate plan for short in future. And as members are well aware, that corporate plan sets out the strategic directions, priorities for the authority, and the 3 objectives, which I'll come to, but again, of which members no doubt are very well aware. It's important we do this for a variety of reasons, but not least to comply with our statutory obligations under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the 7 wellbeing goals that are contained therein. But of course, this is a high-level strategic plan. It doesn't cover all the activities and work undertaken by the council, but it gives a broad overview of those objectives and actions. This report does not include operational performance, and this is monitored, if you like, at a lower level, if I could use that phrase, within the integrated business plans, which no doubt members may wish to come on to in due course. Obviously, the reasons for doing reviewing the corporate plan quarterly is to see how we're doing, to review what's working well, what's not working so well, and again we'll come on to that as we go through the meeting. At this point, I will just ask Catherine to come in, Catherine James, just to deal with any sort of technical issues around how the report's presented, and sort of direct members to where they need to get to understand where we are. So, Catherine.
Thank you. So as an organisation, we do monitor and track our performance, as Councillor James has just mentioned, against the corporate plan. And we use a scorecard to do this, which is publicly available on the website. And there is a link within the report pack to get to that scorecard. So each of the 3 objectives within the plan has their own scorecard showing what has been delivered against each. But for ease, measures that we use to monitor the plan are included in Appendix A of the report pack and provide an overview of the last 5 quarters, enabling comparison with Q3, both this year and looking back at Q3 for 23-24. So to monitor our progress, we do use a reporting system which looks at measure status. So measures are either off track, they may, or on track. They sometimes are just being monitored because for a specific reason there isn't a target for that measure, as well as sometimes measures may show us no data due to the fact that they may not be reported that quarter due to being an annual or biannual measure. And sometimes for some reasons, as you'll see in this quarter, it may be that they're not reported because the data is not yet provided due to issues where we have it through national systems. So the status of measures are automatically calculated by the system that we use, and then this enables us to have this as an indicator to indicate whether progress has met our planned expectations or the actual target. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Leader, are you coming back in then to explain any key headlines?
Yep, sure, if that's okay. So if we start with objective 1, which members will recall is to improve people's awareness of services and how to access them, so we can give our local residents as much informed choice as possible. The view is that we're generally on track with that, with this, although there are bigger successes and failures in amongst that, but generally we're on track. Of the 50 measures that support this objective, 7 are certainly on track. There are measures that were not due to report this quarter for the reasons that Catherine has just said. And there are other measures that don't have targets but are reported for monitoring purposes. Again, Catherine mentioned that. This is sort of rather complicated in a way, and I'm sure Catherine will explain more if members wish to delve into that. 3 measures cannot be reported, and therefore that's why they're shown as blank in the paperwork. And those are those measures at 49, 50 and 51. Some of the measures, some of the activities that are maybe of interest. It's always difficult to judge how people feel we're doing as a council in terms of any of these objectives, but because gathering that sort of broad view is not an easy thing to do, as we know we've always struggled with that. But during that quarter, 86% of the customers who responded in our surveys were satisfied with the services they received, which I think is pretty good. Although again, the sample, it's not huge, but it is probably fairly representative. At this point, I should mention that we are using we're using artificial intelligence, about which I'm sure all of us have mixed views. But in this instance, it is helpful and is enabling us to better analyse what's going on. We're now able to analyse customer feedback on their experience of using web, for example, much faster and with more insight. And this means we'll be able to be more responsive and continue to improve the service. So there are upsides to AI, considerable upsides, although we all understand that there are ups and downsides too in other ways. If I go on to objective 2, and please stop me if you wish to at any point. But an objective 2, to remind members, is to support good quality sustainable employment, and for the council to pursue real living wage accreditation. To say that in particular, that last part of that objective is one I'm particularly keen and proud of that we're doing that. I think it's really important and is a good signal of our intentions and our values as much as anything else. Again, progress broadly on track. Of the 12 measures that support this objective, 5 measures were definitely on track, and none were measured as off track. So that's a good sign. We're moving in the right direction, and 4 of the measures were not due to report in this quarter anyway. So, and 2 have no targets. 1 measure could not be reported, and this shows us blank, therefore, in the paperwork, as the lead service has not provided a target for measure 017. That's the percentage of individuals paid through contractors being paid the real living wage. That's it's quite an important issue for us. How it is that we transfer, if you like, our aspirations around the real living wage to those people who are delivering services on our behalf, who are independent contractors, independent businesses, the degree to which we can insist on the real living wage being paid, you know, and still maintain the service. It's just always a challenge, and there's that balance to strike. But speaking personally, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all cabinet members, and I suspect most, if not all, members of council, we'd just like everybody to be paying the real living wage if they can. So it's still a challenging issue, still one being worked on, and I'm sure officers will come in to explain more if members wish. Some activities of interest within the scorecard on Objective 2. Children's Social Care celebrated the receipt of the Social Care Wales registrations for the Grow Our Own students. 8 have moved into newly qualified social worker positions, and that's, you know, this Grow Our Own strategy is really working. It enables us to reduce reliance on agency staff, which of course are far more expensive to employ than our own staff, and create stability, which is, I think, that's probably more important than anything else. A stable workforce, particularly in social care, in such a sensitive area of work, is really a big bonus. If I move on to adult social care, 7 Grow Our Own students have moved into newly qualified social work positions. Again, for exactly the same comment. It's a really good news story and really important in terms of maintaining the quality of provision within those services. 45 residents presenting with complex barriers to employment voluntarily enrolled into our employability and skills programme, and they accessed intensive one-to-one mentoring and support on their journey into training, further training and employment. So again, you know, a significant number of people for whom getting a job and a decent income is so important to their quality of life. And 5 new projects were awarded funding under the Shared Prosperity Fund, supporting local businesses investment in priority areas, a total of 673,500. And again, this is initiatives aimed at creating sustainable, decently paid jobs. So again, important aspect of our work. So speaking as lead, I think we're making decent progress in this area, and in some respects, very good progress, and that's very pleasing. Objective 3, which is the one about tackling poverty and inequality. Really important and equally really difficult area of work. Tackling poverty is a very pernicious thing within our society, and it's very difficult to move people out of poverty into a better place. But it's so important. And one of the things that I think perhaps one of the most important aspects, I'm speaking off script here, if you like, is that people think that those people who live in Paris are well off, you know, they've got big houses, and, you know, farms. It's not true. There's a lot of poverty in rural areas, and a lot of it is hidden. And indeed, we have perhaps amongst the lowest per capita income in the whole of the UK, which says, and it speaks for itself, really. And I just think, you know, that's a perception that people living in rural areas are well off is one we need to tackle as much as tackling the actual issue itself. And I think the council can do some good work in that area. And I think it's fair to say that progress against it, for the reasons I've said, how difficult the challenge is, and how difficult, you know, there are limitations on what any local authority can do to tackle poverty within budget, within the constraints of the legislation within which we work, within our powers. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think we're doing as well as we could, as can be expected. But the progress, you know, is measured as being mixed, and I think that's fair. Of the 11 measures that support the objective, 3 are on track, 2 are off track. 2 measures not due to report this quarter, and 4 measures have no targets, and again reported for monitoring purposes. The 2 off-track measures were around our carbon account issue, and the number of households who are still, alas, having to be placed in temporary accommodation, and that's around homelessness. And we all understand the immense challenges that presents to every local authority, but in, you know, Paris as much as anybody else. Some of the activities of interest captured in the Objective 3 scorecard, you know, our money advice service, really something we should all be proud of, and I have to pay tribute to the previous administration on the council who introduced this. And you know, it's we've always had good welfare support officers in the council, and the Money Advice Service carries on with that tradition and doing really good work. The total income gain to our residents in this quarter is over £500,000, 561,658 and 51p pounds, 51p. We're getting an average of 29 calls per month, so it's about one a day, and 456 residents referrals were completed. And the team also goes to visit our high schools to provide budgeting tips and financial information to our school pupils. Again, really important work, helping to ensure our school leavers are better prepared for adult life. We've had an increase in domiciliary care provision. We've attracted new providers into the county. Again, that's very positive. Of course, it causes its own budgetary challenges. The more care we deliver, the more it costs. But it's been really good to see that, because it means more of our vulnerable residents are getting the care and support that they need. And of course helps with the hospital flow issue as well. Housing need figures have dropped below target for Paris. Now we have a total of 3,375 households on the Homes in Paris Common Housing Register. This is a significant decrease from 4,438 at the end of Q2. So again, a feather in the cap for the service, I would say, and also compares well with the same period of last year when the figure was at 4,051. So nearly a thousand less people on the register. Now, of course, there could be a variety of reasons for that, but I think it's because the housing service is actually delivering well as well, and I think that's a good sign. That's it, really, Chair. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thanks for talking us through that, and that's interesting to hear your perspective. What we're going to do is move on to questions from the committee, starting with overarching questions that don't necessarily sit specifically within objective 1, 2, or 3. So members, if you know, I've got a list of you, but if you know that you've got a question to ask, please can you put your hand up now? And I'll just ask an introductory question, please, James, to yourself and to any other cabinet members if they wanted to answer. But obviously there's measures in here which are doing really well, and there's measures in here which, as you've alluded to, are off track. But for you, as an administration, you've got another 2 years left. Where in those 2 years would you really like to see focus on improvement on these measures? And also, where are your biggest concerns when you look at this on I don't know how often you look at this, but when you do pick it up and look at it, where are there any areas which are kind of alarm bells to you, or do you think, we really need to push focus of resources into this kind of area?
It's a very fair question, and of course other cabinet members may wish to come in. But sort of, if you're looking at it from a sort of general point of view, from my position as leader of the council, I think the linkages between things like poverty, housing, education attainment, they're all very strong linkages between all of these areas of service. And I guess there's always a danger that we look at them rather in isolation, without actually understanding the wider context within which the local authority and in fact sort of the general economy of the county is working. So I think I would, if I areas of concern for me, I wish we were able to do more on the poverty front, but that's not because we're not trying. It's because it's difficult work. And when whatever any local authority does, or even national governments do, doesn't insulate our society from the wider pressures and that impact on the economic performance of which is such a key part of people's well-being and financial security. So we can't, we're not working in isolation. I think probably I wish that our partner organisations were in a better place, because I think that would have in terms of sort of both financially and resource-wise, all the public sector organisations are facing, and indeed private sector businesses are facing serious headwinds in terms of difficulties recruiting, retaining staff, All of these things are negatively impacting on the amount that we can do as an authority, but also the degree to which the private sector and enterprise can drive our economy. So I am concerned about the general economic situation. I think we are making progress. We're doing very well in areas at the fall outside, perhaps this corporate plan as well, in developing things like the regional skills partnership. I think our economic development work is going very well. Huge improvements in in developing a framework to improve the economy, and it'll be a fairly long time before that feeds through into real tangible improvements in people's well-being. So I think we should all be concerned, wherever we sit within the council, whatever our political views. I think we should all be concerned about the general economic situation, which I think has an impact on all of these things, and to a large extent is outside our control.
Okay, thank you, James. I'm just going to bring in Jake in case he wants to answer part of that question as well, and then we'll move on to questions from cabinet from the committee members. Jake.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to go to the heart of some of these matters. Obviously, I've got a broad portfolio, and I do look at this data very regularly and discuss it with officers. But just looking at people services and customers, they're really important to me because they're all part of how we respect and respond to each other internally and how we project externally. And that goes to the quality of services that we provide and the perception of Powys County Council, which reflects on us all. So in there, I'm really keen to continue to work around the targets of employees being proud to work for Powys Council, that feel valued as employees. And of course, just on the other side of that, on the customers being satisfied with the services that they get, not just with the customer service centre that falls within my remit, but at any touch point that they have with the council. And we are just launching the customer experience framework, which is a whole series of things that we're doing to ensure that, when people do contact us, they're treated promptly and properly, and they get a good customer experience out of that. So in those areas, I think they're contributing to some of the cultural shift that we need to make internally within the council. And I think that will project us better elsewhere. So much of my focus is around that. And of course, it does then touch on other matters around how people are paid, and we value them within the organisation too, Amanda.
Thanks, Jake. Okay, Councillor Gareth, you've got an overarching couple of questions, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying I welcome the fact we've got the trend analysis over the 5 quarters, and that's really good. And I personally like the tab that measures trends because you can actually see the target set. My main question is to the leader: how does the leader and the cabinet then review the targets when looking at the targets for the following year? Because there are a couple of targets that I've picked up where we're exceeding the target set by 20-25%. And in my mind, that is either a sign of really good performance by the service or the sign of the target that's being set being soft. In my head, I think I'd like to see a set of targets where some are achieved by a little bit, some may not be achieved by a little bit, and then you only have the exceptional targets that are overachieved significantly. And I'd like to have that explanation of why those targets have been overachieved.
Gareth, whilst they gather their thoughts on that question, do you want to ask your second question as well about an overarching statement in the main report that accompanies it?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Yeah, it's just the point that when you read the report, leader, it just doesn't say what you've given us some really good explanations this morning about where you think we are in terms of achieving these targets. I think that should be in the body of the report or as an appendix to the report. There's some really good narrative under each of the objectives. In some cases there's not, And this is how we actually reflect that in the report. Because if this is going to be a public document, I like to be able to pick up a report and pick up the main finding just from the body of the report itself.
My view, leader, is that there should be an executive summary. I think we're not going to make a recommendation on specifically on how you should do this, but perhaps our recommendation from the committee today will be for you to have a think about how you present your overarching summary, a little bit like you just did, really, in terms of where your proudest achievements are and where your key focus or key areas of concerns are under each objective and where you want to go in the next year. So I'll leave that one with you. But if officers or portfolio holders or the leader could come and answer Gareth's first question regarding target setting, that would be great, please.
Do you want me to come in? Well, Matthew's got his hand up. Matthew, would you like, perhaps it's best if portfolio holders answer for their own area of service, because they will understand it better than I do. But Matthew, perhaps.
Yeah, go on, Matthew. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Chair. Is that all right? Just to come in on Gareth's question. Thanks very much. Really good question, Gareth, because what we don't want to be doing is presenting targets that appear to present the council as achieving and delivering. What we want to do is to challenge the services to do better. And I'll just say, if you look at the one where we're currently off track in terms of housing and homelessness, you can see over the quarters in the trend analysis that you referred to, the numbers have changed within that target. So we are currently off track, but we are performing better than in a previous quarter. But that's deliberate, because we are trying to challenge the service to be able to address this in different ways. So it is important that as portfolio holders, we do that challenge within performance target setting, that we work with the service to find targets that are challenging, but also achievable. They are ongoing conversations because the need is changing as well, and we've got to be able to respond and adapt to that. So this is something that isn't set for the period of the council. We have to change and adapt as the circumstances and the environment and the budget around us changes. But the most important thing is to challenge the service to be responsive and to do better. And I hope that's what you see through this document. Thanks.
Does that answer your question, Gareth?
Yes, it does for some services, but some I don't think have taken that action. I'm just wondering, is there any of those that are actually linked? The targets are set based on the contract we're in. Freedom Leisure being one. If you look at that target number of visits to the leisure centres, we're overachieving that by 20-odd%.
Can anyone answer that? Jenny, I can see you've got your hand up.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can provide an answer to this. So the leisure contract participation was set when the leisure contract was initiated in 2015. The contract does provide provision for review of those targets. The first year of the contract was to establish a baseline for Freedom Leisure as part of the participation, and it was monitored for the next couple of years after that. Unfortunately, as we all know, COVID then happened. So 2019-20, when a review was actually going to take place, the leisure centres were then closed until late 2021 into 2022. The leisure industry as a whole was then recovering throughout 2022. So that was the year 22-23. And many of the participation figures, as you can see in the report, those participations for leisure centres have been in steady increase since COVID and since the energy crisis. So actually, again, the contract does provide provision for those contract targets to be reviewed, and that is something that is going to be undertaken at the end of this financial year, because again, the provision within the contract allows that at the end of the financial year. So just the assurance that they will be reviewed, but at the moment we have the targets that are currently within the contract.
Okay. I think for any targets that are reviewed but then make their way into this report, and I think it is clear in some areas, but it would be helpful if there was a little star or an asterisk or something that just says, target updated from whatever it was. Okay, Gareth, has that answered your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Chair. So my question was about the grey areas on the chart, and thank you very much to James and Catherine. You have sort of explained that some of these targets are annual, so in quarters 2, 3 and 4 there won't be any figures, but there are still a couple of targets on there where for quarter 1 and the current quarter, there's no data. So I just wondered, how useful is that information and what can we do with that? So let me give you a for example. So number 2 on objective 1, number of people in Powys with access to preventative digital solutions. What does it tell us, and of what use is that? But just going, I've got another couple of examples, but I just wonder, there's another one where the reports are in quarter 2, but they're not shown on this chart. Would it be useful for us to see them? But I'm more concerned about some of the targets in objective 3, if I could just flip down to there. So when we're looking at the housing targets, so 31 and 31 in particular. So we're looking at the number of homes created by bringing back empty properties into use. Having no target, how do we know that that's good value for money? I know we've employed, or we've got a role now within the council for somebody to work on this. So surely we need a target to know where we're going.
Yeah, someone able to answer that? I think we are going to come on to objective 3, but I think if we can give an answer to the overall question on, there are some things here where we're not clear on why there's no target, I think. Councillor Matthew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Just in relation to measure 31, I think that the target we've set ourselves is that a higher number is better, and it's accumulative across the quarters. I think I've said before at Economy Residents and Community Scrutiny that this piece of work has been a challenge, and it's not delivered as we had previously hoped, but we have been making some changes and improvements as the quarters have progressed. This is a work in progress, and it's very much under my spotlight as portfolio holder to see it improve and do better. There are significant challenges around it that we're still working through, and we've recently launched the section on the corporate website where people are able to report empty properties for us to target them. But yeah, it's an accumulative one, and it's over a longer period and rather than just in each quarter. But I take the challenge, and I'll discuss it further with the service and see if we can make some adjustments to it for scrutiny. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Councillor Chris, did you have a question on this area as well? I just wonder whether it might be helpful to bring you in here to sort of provide some more context as to why we're asking this question. This was your question as well, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was, and I think it is a build on what Angela had mentioned. Obviously, as a part of the process, we have some of them, the areas where we've got no target set, but underneath it is then got monitoring. And then within the boxes below, we have a series of data that is being collected on maybe number of contacts, etc. Is the intention that we are then going to set a target going forward? And if not, what is the relevance and the value of collecting the data? And in relation to time and effort of doing that, how does that then work its way through? Because in some ways it builds on what Gareth was mentioning before, Councillor Gareth, sorry, in relation to stretch targets, or are they too soft targets and I would just like to understand that a bit more.
James, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, which it built on Angela's. Thank you, Chair. It built on Angela's point about those in grey, and she specifically mentioned number 2, the digital solutions for people. I mean, I don't think you can set a specific target for that. What we want to see is the trend, and it's going up, which is good, because it means that we're using digital means to prevent people having to come into residential or even hospital care, and that has to be a good thing, because if you take that for example, what we know from analysis is that once people go into residential care, for example, they tend to stay there. they don't go back home again. Even if we intended that they only went in there as an interim measure, once they get into a kind of institutional environment of that nature, that unfortunately they tend to decondition and remain there and lose their independence. So the higher that number is, within reason, obviously, and again, that's sort of it's so dependent on each person's individual needs. It's impossible to set a specific target for that, and I think it's appropriate that we don't, but it is appropriate that we monitor it. And I suspect that's what Catherine may want to add to what I've just said. But I suspect that's why these are presented in this way. But I completely get the point that you could question how much help it is, but for me, it's helpful. It's indicating that we are getting an increasing number of people assisted through this means, and the positive benefits for that as individuals, but also for wider society, are very significant. Whether that's a high enough number or not, I can't say, and I don't think anybody can say. But what I would like to see is, as technology allows us to do it, that number increases, and as long as that's happening, I feel reasonably happy that that's a helpful indicator. Does that help explain? Catherine, did you want to add to that in any way?
No, Councillor James, what you said there is spot on. So often with some of these measures, you can't really set a target, and that's the whole approach that we've got here in terms of some results-based accountability, so monitoring the trend, etc. But I can see Sharon's got her hand up.
Yeah, and so is Councillor Jake. Just to apologise if there's some background noise from me, then I've had to move rooms because there's some outside work going on outside my house, which is making my dog go a little bit crazy. So I've had to change where I was sitting. Yeah, Councillor Jake, did you want to come in first and just respond to the question from your perspective?
Yes, thanks. I mean, Catherine has just referred there to results-based accountability, which is a generalized term which might go across a range of these. And it is difficult to answer without looking at specific ones. So I'll just pick a specific one and respond to that if I may. So the number of apprentices employed, for instance, where we have no target, but we monitor that on an ongoing basis, is very difficult from period to period. That we might be going through a period where we're recruiting more people, we have more opportunities within change programs, and can recruit more as a general proportion of change. There'll be areas where we're retracting and not seeing those opportunities. But as an overall position, it's really good to know where we stand on it, because overall we want to increase the apprentice opportunities within the council, of course, but it will fluctuate, and it's really good for me to see, so I can challenge officers on a regular basis, which I do, to ensure that when opportunities arise within departmental areas, that they seek out these opportunities to bring an apprentice in, rather than simply going to the job description on the shelf and saying we'll have another one of those. So it's really useful for me to go in and challenge, but a target wouldn't be appropriate there, because it's really dynamic. It flows as an organisation within the overall workforce plan that we have. So I hope that helps on that single one, for instance.
Sharon, did you want to come in from your perspective from adult social services?
Yes, please, Chair. It was just to really agree with the comments from the leader and Catherine, but just also to assure board that we have lots of levels of data within the service that we monitor regularly, as in types of users, level of equipment, types of equipment, multiple users, etc. So this is a high level figure around the overall usage, and would agree that actually the more the better, and we would expect to see it going up. We can, if it's wished for, we could review and compare ourselves with other counties to get a comparison and look at maybe setting a target. But at the moment, it's really just the more users, the better, and as long as we're increasing, that's what we want to see.
Thank you. Angela and Chris, has that answered your question, or do you still feel that there's some which you'd rather see a target for? Angela?
Yeah, for me, it does answer the question, but I think perhaps over time we do possibly it's relevant for each scrutiny committee then to drill down a bit more. I think, as Sharon said there, it would be useful if we could benchmark it in some way. I don't know, Jake's example, apprentices as a percentage of the whole workforce or something. I don't know what the measure would be, but I think over a period of time we need to know whether that figure is worth the effort or not, because there's a cost to every one of these targets, isn't there, in an amount of work behind the scenes. But yeah, answers for now. Thank you, Chair.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite pleased with the response that's been given, because we are watching a trend line, and that's then is giving us some information that we can then utilize and move forward. I do understand that sometimes we don't necessarily need to have a clear measure on it, but that trend line is quite helpful. So thank you for the comments.
Thank you. Councillor Liz. You're on mute, Liz. You're still on mute. No, I think it came on and then it's flipped back. There you go.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Earlier in our pre-meeting, we were having a conversation about the usefulness of the BI report. And, you know, we clearly understand as a committee how we use it ourselves. But we were interested to know how it's used in the wider senior leadership team and across the council, and how it might be linked to the corporate risk register. So really the question we were asking ourselves was, is this something that we look at once every 3 months, or is it something that is being used, you know, on a day-to-day basis? And we just wondered perhaps that might be something that Catherine or Emma might want to lead in an answer on.
Jake, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, only to say, I think we'll, as individuals within Cabinet, we all might slightly differ with this, but I think what we all have is regular monthly meetings on a one-to-one basis with officers, and also we have regular group meetings with officers. So this week I've met with the property team, and this week I've met with the planning and building control section as well, and within which we analyse data. And on a quarterly basis, obviously, we look through the data within BIs. But just to say, I am challenging on a very regular data basis individual performance, which is tied back to this, and of course visiting risks. So for instance, the conversation was about risks with IT procurement and the impacts they may have, not just on cost overruns, but on future performance within service areas within the 4 Ps. So just to say, it is a very detailed matter for me to go through this data with officers, holding them and the services to account, and obviously for me to provide support, guidance and advice at a strategic level, not operational, around those services, which is how I see my role, if that helps.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's you'll all have loads of data, won't you, that sit underneath this and alongside it. And so it's really for those who are in strategic overarching positions where there's cross services, how you're able to use this in a purposeful way. Clive, are you able to help on this?
Thank you, Chair. I hope I can. From an individual perspective, I think all senior officers will use these dashboards, and this particular dashboard to different levels. We'll all look at it every week. I would suggest. I think probably not every day. I'm not one that looks at it every day, but certainly every week. I would hope everybody else does. I also would indicate to members that the dashboards, this dashboard is looked at a number of levels. For instance, every week at CLT, we perhaps don't look at the dashboard itself, but we do look at risks and service risks, and it's a standing item on our agendas. The same is true of all service SMTs, service management teams. So the risks are looked at management teams, and that's where the dashboards are looked at collectively across the services. And as I said, as a head of service, I probably look at it once a week, but not. I'm sorry to say, I don't look at it every day.
Okay, everyone's popping their hands up now. So, yeah, I think if you could just quickly explain how you individually, how this is useful and purposeful for you. I'm going to jump ahead of you, James, if that's okay, because I'm just quite keen to hear from Matt and Emma. Matt.
Yeah, just to echo what Clive has just said, and the information is reviewed regularly. It does inform risk registers. So if something does crop up that needs to be escalated, it is escalated. And something that we are introducing into CLT on a monthly basis. Gwilym's already started it with Plan and Regulatory Services, so key performance information, which gives a very high level snapshot of how the service is performing over the month. That's coming into CLT, and the same is going to happen for housing and HTR as well over the next few months. So from a corporate perspective, it gives us that oversight. So just to give that assurance, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Emma?
Thank you, Chair. Try not to repeat what's been said, but underneath this, as Matt has referred to, we've got monthly performance information. So I probably not probably, I refer to that more frequently than I do this one because I refer to this quarterly. The monthly information isn't available for every service yet, but that's something that we're working through. And so planning and regulatory services are the latest addition, whereas the social services information is already, the systems and processes are already set up and fairly robust in that area. What I also do underneath this is biannual directorate meetings where I meet with all the heads of service and the directors. So we've got the standard mechanisms of, weekly corporate leadership team. We've got the fortnightly senior leadership teams where we can discuss the information and then think about whether we need to do any alignment in year. Are there particular barriers, obstacles that I need to get involved with, and conversations to have with the directors themselves? Is it that we've got underperformance for individuals or teams, and in which case, what are we doing around the performance management of those teams? Or sometimes it might be around the level of resource that's required in there, and you might see in year then, for instance, a environment that comes through the governance of from the financial reporting. Within all of this, there's the risks run at a service level, program and project level, and then we use the framework to understand whether we need to escalate to the strategic level. So there might be things at an operational level that we just need to get on with and work through and address without reporting to the portfolio holders, that within cabinet CLT. But there's a judgment around that, because if we can still deliver the outcomes that we're trying to achieve within timescale, then actually we don't need to escalate to that level necessarily. But if we feel that overall those things are going to be off track as we're monitoring through the year, then absolutely it will inform a paper through to cabinet CLT, respective scrutinies, etc. There is more that we can do, and we continue to do, but it just takes time as we're learning and working through month on month. So
is there anything, Emma, where you've picked up one of these reports and you've thought, actually, this tells me something that I can't find out through monthly performance reports, and then you've gone and wanted to drill down further? Has that situation happened with the use of this report to date?
Yeah, so we've just thinking if I think about the providers paying the real living wage to external providers, there's an absence and a void of information there. So that's informing in terms of the work that we want our corporate procurement team to undertake in respect of our contracting and how that works through our commissioning board. The apprenticeships, I'm quite passionate about apprenticeships because I feel that they're our future workforce based on the demographics. And when I look at this data, I was challenging the senior leadership team as to whether we're walking the talk. Are we doing enough around this? Should we be doing more? We put in place a decision around anything below grade 8, for instance, should be offered as an apprentice first. What this was telling me was that's not happening. So then I was able to have a conversation in the senior leadership team to say, this isn't good enough. We committed to do this. We need to deliver. What are you all doing to take that forward? So we can have very robust conversations then around that.
That's a really helpful example. Right, I've got loads more hands keep popping up, so sorry to jump on, Emma. Nina.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Liz, for the question. Just following on from Emma, just, in terms of monthly service performance data, we collate that within the service. That's discussed and shared and challenged by portfolio holders monthly, also shared with Cabinet and with Scrutiny as well, as you will be aware. This report that we're looking at today, the scorecard, etc., we, every service area will have quarterly meetings where it is scrutinised and challenged with portfolio holders, director, head of service and senior managers. And risk is a really key element of those meetings as well, making sure that we're pulling through and identifying. And then we have every quarter, we have a dedicated senior leadership team meeting focusing on this as well, where we're challenging across service areas as well, which is really helpful. And again, risk really features very heavily in that. And Emma's given you some examples of things that we've pulled out in the past, for example. So I just wanted to give you a very quick kind of update following on from my colleagues, just what a level of detail we use this data for and the challenge that it does go through and what it helps to tell us as well. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Liz.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Leader, do you want to wrap up the answer to this question?
Well, yes, really. If you like, thank you, Chair. Just as an observation, really, as somebody who's been a county councillor on and off for a very long time, I just reflect when I see the sort of volume and detail and availability of the information that we now have as members at our fingertips, if we wish to use it. It's just so different to how it was even just 5 or 10 years ago. And in a sense, we're really lucky. I remember when I first became a councillor, none of this sort of information was available to members. None of it, because either because we didn't collect or because it just wasn't given to members, or both. And it, now we have that. Now, so that raises the point: are we using this? And this is Emma's point, I suppose. Are we using this wealth of information, which is now at our fingertips, to better direct our efforts and resources? And she used the example,
which I think was the crux of our question. Is so what, isn't it?
I think that's a really good challenge, and I'm glad Emma made the point she made, and I'm sure that as we get more and more used to it, and I admit even now I find Power BI quite difficult to use. Actually, because I'm technically challenged, but officers who use it either every day or weekly, I'm sure they're better at it. So I think we've got a really good basis on which to make improvements from this sort of stuff.
Thank you. I'm 4 minutes behind where I want to be on my little mini schedule, but that's okay. I think just to wrap up that last point, just for consideration, is whether or not within the executive summary that we've requested, in going back to Gareth's question before, whether it would actually be helpful for you to include a line or two as to where this report has made a difference. So Emma's just given the example about the apprenticeships. That gives a more meaningful purpose to this, and it would be really helpful to have that in an executive summary. So we'll put that as a recommendation for consideration as well. And thank you, members, for those overarching questions. We're now going to move on to questions on to the specific objective areas. So firstly, on objective 1, I know, members, I've got a note of questions from Glyn, Graham and Chris. So if you want to put your hands up, whoever wants to go first on those. Councillor Chris, you've gone first. I think your question is on AI, the AI part of it, is it?
It is, and it's in relation to the objective 1, and it was looking at children's services. It mentions in there that there is consideration of AI, particularly in the first contact points of using AI there, and also then around social work activity in freeing up time. What I just wanted to get, again, that gives some useful elements of AI, but there are some risks with it, as the leader pointed out in his opening comments. So I just wanted to know what modelling has been done, and obviously with it being focused towards children's services, I just wanted to make sure that the risk component in all of this has been considered as well.
Who would like to take that one? Sharon? Oh, no, she's gone on off. Who would like to answer that question?
Yeah, hello, I'm Karen Sharp. I'm Senior
Hi,
Manager
Karen.
Early Help and Assessment, and I'm here on behalf of Sharon Powell, so I can answer from Children's Services perspective, certainly. In terms of the front door, we've been looking at how we can use AI to streamline some of our processes. We haven't implemented anything, but we did some benchmarking across all of the local authorities in Wales, and we know that all the services provided at the front door across those different authorities are also considering it. But we're looking at packages that are already being used in other local authorities within the UK. So there's the risks will be managed, and we're aware of those risks. We're never going to be able to replace human decision making, but there are some areas, particularly around minute taking, for example, that could really help us to save some time, and that's similarly with social workers as well. But there'll always be that human element to any kind of assessment. There's no way that we would use artificial intelligence to assess risk. But there are other ways that it can free up qualified worker time so that expertise can be used. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Fruin, do you want to add something from adults' perspective?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. And just to reinforce what Karen was saying, we have a digital champion group where we are testing different options in a really controlled manner to reassure Councillor Chris, and that we're identifying any risk areas and mitigating for those. We're also part of the co-pilot champion network across Wales via Social Care Wales, and learning in a controlled environment there around risk, but also not being risk averse. And as Karen was describing, those things are being trialled across adult services as well. So we're talking about chatbots, etc., at that first phase of self-assessment, but not replacing the human element if needed, but also using things like magic notes, transcription aids to free up social work time. Again, that frees up social work time to have that personal interaction with people. So again, not replacing and certainly not doing assessments. Anything transcribed is thoroughly checked, and we are picking up on nuances and issues, and that will inform the types of AI and tools that we use and those that we don't, that we can't trust.
Thank you. Chris, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an area where I think that we do need to consider and not be totally risk averse to it. I'm reassured with the comments that have been given. And again, if we're taking sustainable powers, AI is going to be one of the platforms that we'll be using to give us a bit more flexibility moving forward. So thank you for the responses.
Thanks, Chris. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is in regard to Objective 1 and number 10, the issue around percentage of children, young people and their families reporting that they achieve their family goal through assessing early help. And I'm a little concerned at the fact that we're saying that we're on track. My understanding is that we may have a target level of 85%. I'm not completely sure if that's right. But the figures clearly show that we are falling. We started off at 92% and we fell to 88% in the current quarter. So my question really is, where are we looking at this? Should this be falling as on track when there's a general trend that this figure is falling?
Thank you, Graham. Can I just add to that question as well and just ask, how do you measure this one? How do you gauge that information? How do you bring that in? How do you know that that's how they feel?
Hello, Chair. Yeah, I can answer this as I'm manager for early help and assessment. So this is coming from our Welsh Government tracking tool that we use when we're working with families. So we use that at the beginning and the middle of and the end of our intervention. If that intervention has gone from beginning to end successfully insofar as the family have engaged with us. So it's self-reported, and it's just one of a raft of different methods that we use to to help us to understand whether or not early help is being successful. So this is a self-reported overarching one, but there are lots of other it's a distance travel tool is the name of the tool, but there are lots of other measures that we use, and then we report that back to Welsh Government. It has dropped in the last year, but I think it's still high. It's still a relatively high figure, and it does tend to fluctuate. I think it's also we're very much reliant on the human factor insofar as we have our family support workers undertaking that bit of work. So we've got to make sure that we do it from beginning, middle and end. So sometimes that process breaks down and we don't do it as thoroughly as we could do. So it's something that we're constantly working on, because it's a really good way for us to be able to evidence that early help is working. So I do take your point. I think that we can look at that, the measure again in the new financial year. I think we could potentially look at increasing that, because we are consistently having very good results in early help. But yes, I take that on board. I think that the figure does fluctuate though.
Thank you, Karen. Graham, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Glynn.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd. Yeah, my questions relate to measure 49 and 50, basically around residents' feeling that they are satisfied with their opportunity to be able to have a say and participate in the decision making process. And I suppose for both of those measures, it showed that we were on track. And it sort of doesn't necessarily tally with my sort of understanding of the public's perception of their ability to have a say on decision making, of the decision making process of the council. So I suppose my question is, what is the data set? How are we collecting the data? What's the sample size? And then I suppose relatedly, do we think that data is a meaningful measure of those two particular aims or objectives?
Thank you, Glyn. Who's able to answer that one, please?
I will. Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.
So this quarter, these have not been reported, as you will note in the report that you've got in front of you and shows blank. So this is the reason for this is that the measures are not intended to represent whole engagement levels. They were part of a suite of measures that were sort of provided for. So when people go on our Have Your Say page and participate in an online survey and such, they have the opportunity then to answer some additional questions, which are these. However, we have found over the year, and I think we have had quite a lot of discussion around these, that there have been very, very small samples. And this quarter, it was that small due to the fact that there were no consultation sort of taking place, that it was just from people who had gone onto the website themselves, and it was that small of a number. It's deemed it is that small that it's not right to report on it because it's not statistically significant. I think if you worked it out as a proportion of the whole population, it would be 0.0006% of the people that live in Powys. So it's something that we are looking at because I think it has caused confusion where people sort of see it as a whole engagement sort of response when really it's a very, very small portion of people. So it's something that we're reviewing to make something, to give us something more meaningful and useful, because there's no point having measures that are no use and we can't use to then improve. Thanks.
Just a food for thought is whether or not that link could go on planning consultation pages, because that's somewhere where members of the public are regularly feeding into the council on consultations. So I'll just leave that one with you. Did anyone else want to answer that question, or Glenn, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, thanks, Catherine, for that answer. I wonder whether I could just ask perhaps the leader or a portfolio holder, I mean, on those two tests about do people feel like they can have their say and they can participate in decision making, how do you think we are doing as a council in making residents feel part of the decision making process or engaging with them actively?
Leader?
Yeah, I think the answer is that struggling. I think is the best way to describe that. I think this is a struggle that the council has wrestled with for as long as I can remember. I mean, obviously, if we're proposing to do something dramatic like close a school, the council is inundated with respondents on that particular issue. But when we're talking in generalities like this, it is much more difficult. And engagement is an ongoing and very active debate, I have to say, within the cabinet and more widely within the council. How do we best go about this? And indeed, the sequence of events, if you like. When it's come to things like schools transformation, if Pete Roberts were here, he'd tell you that we changed the way we went about that and sort of front-loaded the engagement, particularly with the local schools community, before progressing things further through cabinet reports and so on, whereas before it tended to be the other way around. And I think that has improved in the sense that people feel a bit more engaged in the process, but it's a really difficult issue. I don't think there's any doubt about that, and when we've just got to keep striving to do better.
Is there anything you want to do, James, to re-engage on past decisions where you become aware, for example, something at the time may not have been a big deal, but as it's coming to light, I don't want to go down the tangent of what I'm thinking of, but there's obviously certain things where the public become aware of something and increasingly raise their concerns through their councillors or their community councils or social media. And then there would be, a way of trying to re-engage formally rather than just taking, things off the internet. Is there any measures like that where you would like to do more?
I think, yeah. I mean, it's good. It's a good question. I think we need to learn. We always need to learn lessons about things. But as you say, you take a decision, and perhaps it's not going to be implemented for some time. And then when it is going to be implemented, suddenly everybody becomes aware of it and says, "Oh, I'm not so sure I like this." But what I think we also must always remember is that we must never forget the silent majority, because we always it's important not to overreact to things that come back at us, because you're always going to get some people don't like what you're doing. That is inevitable, and they're the ones who tend to make a lot of noise, and the ones who actually either don't care or are reasonably content tend to say nothing. I just think of a number of examples of that over the past years where we've had a storm of protest about something, but actually when it came to testing how widespread that concern was, it wasn't as wide as we thought it was. And I think we've got to remember that the number of people who engage in a lot of sort of social media activity are not necessarily the majority of the population. And probably the majority of the population doesn't engage in that sort of activity at all. So I think we've got to be a bit careful how we analyze these things and remain objective at all times, but also be confident in our decisions. If we think we've done the right thing, and the evidence upon which we've made that decision is strong, that we've done the right thing. We've gone about it carefully. We've prepared objectively. We've done the necessary research and gathered that evidence, and it all points to making a decision in a certain direction. And we should be confident in our ability and the wisdom of taking that decision, and not necessarily be swayed by an upsurge of what appears to be widespread public opinion, but probably if you actually look at it closely, isn't that widespread. So I think I'm not suggesting be complacent. You must always listen to the public, but it's really important. We all get sent here to do something. We get sent here to take these decisions, and that's what our public elects us to do. And we shouldn't just shirk away from taking them just because we might get some noise about the decisions, which inevitably some of them are going to be unpopular and very difficult for some people to accept. So I can see Sian's got a hand up, and she's got a much better handle on this sort of thing than I have on the engagement issue than I have.
Yeah, and I can see Jake's got his hand up.
I do want to make the point. Leadership is about being taking well-reasoned decisions, and then being prepared to stick with them when the going gets a bit rough.
So the question was on engagement generally, but also re-engagement. So Jake and Sian, have you got any comments to add to
I
those?
can just coming in quickly. Look, we're not here to be a weather vane or a cushion to take on the shape of whoever sat on us last. We are about increasing an opportunity for people to have a voice and to exercise that voice and to contribute meaningfully for consultations that we have. And I mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it again now. We are launching our customer experience framework now currently, and I would ask you as members and others to engage positively with us in respect of that, because we'll be going out to our Powers People's panel, and we'll be getting people actively involved in that to better track and to record what people believe their experiences are in dealing directly with us. And it isn't just a matter of counting the number of people who shout. That's absolutely not where we want to be. It's about much more nuanced and considered things. And I'm really grateful, Glyn, for asking the question, because actually, whilst we do work on planning consultations, there are consultations that Pete is doing around schools, etc., etc. We do a whole series of segmented conversations, but the discussion that we're having collectively at the moment is actually who owns that as a portfolio holder. So Amanda, you said, would the portfolio holder like to come in? Well, actually, I don't think there is a portfolio holder that owns these particular corporate measures, which is why Catherine came in to respond. And actually, if we take something away from this, I think it might be a consideration around that, because engagement overall is different from engagement in particular things like planning with certain criteria that apply. And I know, Sean and I and Adam and our officers and Councillor David are looking at how we engage in localities, in places, across various topics around sustainable powers and how we transform the organisation in a broader sense. And I think, honestly, I don't think we're there yet. I think the work that we're doing around some of that work with members, with communities, is challenging us and is stretching us, but I think we're being increasingly creative in responding to that. So I think this is work not yet done, Amanda. I really thank Councillor Glynn for raising that. And I think we need to take that away with Cabinet CLT, have further discussions about how we own it and respond positively. But it isn't about just listening to those who shout loudest. We wouldn't be doing anyone any benefit in doing that. Thank you.
Councillor Shan, did you want to respond? I'm just fairly conscious of time, and I want to move on to objective 2 in the next few minutes, if that's possible.
And Councillor Jacobs referenced some of the things I was going to talk about, but just really to and because I don't want to divert you away from this very targeted, specific and focused question as well. But I think it does speak more broadly to a broader issue, which is the council's relationship with residents. And I think it's kind of shorthand, and it's not meant pejoratively, but you've heard a reference, the phrase used, those who shout loudest. And I think what's really key is that people who shout loudest need to be heard too, but need to be heard with everybody. So it's about working on how we engage with people so that we hear the maximum amount of voices and we're hearing what people really think. There's a huge range of expertise, creativity, intelligence, ideas out there in the population. And I think those who shout loudest have also got lots of that themselves. And when they shout, it's because they're motivated by the fear of losing something they care about, or a decision that they strongly disagree with. And that's a natural human reaction. We're much more likely to make our voices heard, to raise our heads above the parapet when we've been activated by something that causes a strong emotion in us. So I think it's key that those people are involved. I think there's something here for us around recognising that a lot of our engagement is reactive. It's about, what do you think of this, rather than getting upstream of the thinking that's brought about these kind of plans and ideas, and finding out what the population think about life in general and things that are affecting them before we start getting behind closed doors in design rooms to put plans together. So Councillor Jacobs referenced the work that we're doing behind the scenes. We're at sort of a pilot design stage for a different, more innovative way of harnessing the collective intelligence of residents who want to be involved, and designing a structure of engagement that is much more meaningful and isn't just about completing an online survey. They have their place, not to knock them. They're very useful for a range of things, but there's something there around developing that into something much more comprehensive.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sean. Okay, moving on then. Councillor Allard, is yours on objective 1?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. I'm glad to see the conversation has sort of drifted towards what I was looking at, really, because Councillor Benjamin talked at the beginning about, the touch point, the customer experience, and those issues, and now, and as part of the monitoring cycle, you look at the scorecard updates in the first quarter of the next financial year from April onwards. With that in mind, the objective 1 is really, all the measures are really heavily weighted towards social services. Absolutely nothing on HTR, highways, transport and recycling. And there's a lot of contact and communities, people across the county are encouraged to get involved and report stuff through the websites. There's nothing in objective 1, or the measures within objective 1, that reflects the HTI element, an extremely important part of the power services. Why is that? And will you try and amend that as well? Because I think it really lacks focus on road conditions, pothole repairs, etc., and people's satisfaction with the response to them there as well. And I do resent some people being portrayed within the community as being shouty. It's every person's point is valid. It is important that people have their say.
Sorry, Alad, I think Councillor Shan did make that point too. So we've had some different perspectives from them.
Yes, but it's really important that all points are fully responded to, whatever consultation is, whether you agree with them or not, that those points raised are fully responded to. But my main point is around the monitoring cycle, the lack of HCR in the measures, and maybe could that be looked at for the next cycle?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think John's got his hand up. I think, John, on the forms which members of the public fill in where they report problems, can some consideration be given to how then people are fed back? Because there's problems there anyway, I think, with people knowing what it is that's being updated, because you just get a code. But surely there should be a way of people then being able to say whether they're satisfied with how the process has gone. John, are you able to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And to reassure Councillor Allard, we recognise that there's been some issues with the feedback on the digital system, and conversations are ongoing with colleagues from digital to try and put in place improvements. And I know this, we're looking at Q3 now, but for next year we've included a measure for HTR around number of missed collections in terms of the recycling service. So we've taken note of it, reviewed it, and we've put it in for next year.
Thank you. I think it's going to be one of our recommendations.
Will that appear in one of these measures in the next quarter then?
Yes.
Oh, but it's not just recycling; it's the road conditions as well, isn't it? So something needs to be in there.
I think I'd like to make an overall objective on this, please, for you all to consider how you can put anything where people report through the website, whether it be recycling, roads or whatever, how you can take this measure and improve engagement, and we'll make that as an overarching objective. I really want to move on to objective 2. Angela, I can see your hand is up. Jackie, I can see your hand is up. Are you able to put something in the chat on if there's something else on objective 1? So I want to move on to objective 2. I know Adrian has got a question. Graham, you've got another question as well. Alid. So objective 2, please, members. Adrian.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Mine is on number 18, the people and vacancies. It reads that there's been a drop in vacancies since Q1 of 100. So, reading that, how do you read it? Is it that we've employed an extra 100 people, or have unfilled vacancies been removed?
Who's able to answer that one, please? Catherine, is that something you... Oh, Paul. Hi, Paul.
Thanks, Chair. What that kind of direction of travel tells us is the impact of a kind of recruitment challenge in the UK has diminished. So we go back to 2022 after the pandemic, employers across the United Kingdom posted 1.3 million vacancies. Today it's back to about 800,000 vacancies. So we're over that recruitment challenge. And what it shows is the council is more able now to recruit to its vacancies. So in answer to the elected member's question, what it means is we are recruiting more staff to our vacancies. So it's good news, really, Chair.
So we've expanded the workforce.
It means we're able to fill vacancies. I can't say it's expanded because there's a correlation of how many people leave as well.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
No, thank you.
Emma, did you want to come in on this as well?
It's not on that particular point, Chair. You won't forgive me, but it was actually on the last point that Councillor Aled was making. I just wanted to confirm something, if I may.
Yes, if you're able to do so very quickly.
Very quickly. In the updated corporate plan that went through council early this year, under objective 1 in the how much section, there are a number of new measures included around those contacting the organisation through various channels. What we'll be able to do, whilst there's not a line within this specific to HTR, because actually we need to look at the whole council, what we can do is draw out the themes that are coming from that, and we can include that in the narrative that you were referring to earlier, Councillor Amanda. So I think we can tie it in, we can tie those elements in that way. Just wanted to cover off the point raised. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on objective 2? I think Graham, you had a question on apprentices, but I think that may have already been answered. No. I just got a quick question.
Graham's left. Sorry, I think Graham's left the meeting, Amanda.
Oh, okay, not to worry. I've just got a quick question about whether or not we track the number of employment opportunities that are offered to either care leavers or adults with learning disabilities or disabilities who are in receipt of our services, but then may be able to be offered work within the authority if that was suitable for them. Is there anything that tracks that? Sharon.
Apologies, Chair, couldn't unmute. That's something we've highlighted ourselves recently that we need to do more of. We don't currently track those with an LD, but it is something that we'll be building into our new supported employment model.
And then if that was to make its way would that ever be able to be a measure on here, or would that, to approve that as a measure on here, does that need to go through a certain process?
We do track it in our monthly, the amount of people in supported employment in our monthly reports.
I just wondered if it would ever make its way onto this report. Catherine, James, is that something that you were able to answer? If there was something which, Sharon said, we're doing this in our service area and we have this data, this actually would go towards objective 2. Is that something then you could bring in for objective 2 onto the report in the future?
Yes, as long as Sharon, head director, etc., are happy to do so. Yes, of course we can add in measures.
Okay, thank you. That might be something to consider then. Councillor Shan, did you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just quickly to say, I think that it would be a good idea. I think objective 2 is quite heavily weighted on the county council as an employer, and I think it would be useful to see in their work that's being done in communities with people to support them into employment, whether it's voluntary or paid employment, in terms of their well-being and their sense of purpose.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Angela, is that your comment in the chat about measures around reducing agency workers? Do you want to just elaborate on that, please?
Well, it's just something we hear about a lot in the council, about the cost of agency workers to the council. And I just wonder, is there a specific measure for that, or is it too broad a thing? Yeah.
I know we get data in children's and adults, which has been very positive recently, but in terms of the overarching picture within the council, is there anything that Nina?
Yeah, apologies, Chair. You've kind of just answered what I was going to say. Obviously, we measure that monthly within adults and children's. And as Councillor Amanda is absolutely right in saying, it's been a really positive story with a significant reduction in agency staff across the service. But if, I think we could definitely take it back to consider across the senior leadership team as to whether we need to look wider than social services and include something with the corporate. As Catherine has said, if we feel that following your feedback, we could look at a new measure, then there is a means of doing that. So we could take that as way to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else on objective 2, or are we ready to move on to objective 3, which has probably got more questions? Emma?
You asked me earlier about how how we use this information, beyond the sort of quarterly reporting and how that informs elements. So looking at our sickness absence, which is part of quarter 2, I just wanted to give you assurance that we asked Paul to undertake a piece of benchmarking and comparator work around sickness levels. We were able to obtain information for 10 other local authorities in Wales, and I'm pleased to report that we were the lowest level in respect of sickness absence when we compared to those other 10. I'm afraid we were unable at that time to get the information for other local authorities. That said, we've also done a further drill down through the corporate leadership team, asking directors about how they're managing sickness, whether there are any particular hotspots, are we fulfilling policy, what are we, etc. That has led to a very good conversation actually about some further actions that we can take. So I'm hopeful that we can get our sickness levels even lower, even though we're already at the lowest when we compare against the other authorities that we were able to compare against. So I thought it was important for you to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you. In relation to the questions in there where they're off track, so for example, the one on whether employees feel proud to work to the workforce, do you drill down further into that to see whether that's got themes within specific service areas?
Yeah, it might be helpful for Paul to come in with more detail, but actually all of the directors and heads of service then take the element in terms of the overarching survey that we do annually, so that we can understand what that means for the particular areas. It's really important, and again, more we can do, significant. I mean, overall, we've got positive responses over the years, which is good to see actually. From our workforce, because they're such an important part of the organisation in terms of the delivery of our services for the people of Powys. One of the things that I do find quite challenging when talking to the staff, and I try to reassure them, is with a population of 134,000, we must take into context some of the things that our staff are reading on social media, or some of the negative headlines that get drawn, because they're the very same staff that actually people want to work harder and do more, but that can be quite difficult and demoralizing for some in terms of motivation. But overall, we've got 84% of our workforce are also residents of Powys, which I think is a strength for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul. Oh,
Yeah,
Paul, I
so
can't hear
sorry, just making sure that the sound was on. Yeah, on that particular measure, on feeling proud to work for Powys, we hit a peak the previous 2 years of 80. So we obviously said we wanted to at least reach that peak again, and if not better it. But what I would say is I think 79 is an excellent result anyway, and we just need to get back to that peak. When we do compare ourselves to others, we do well on these kind of measures. And the other thing we've done, Chair, is I led a kind of benchmarking group for Wales last year, and we've agreed across the 22 local authorities to start measuring this across everybody. We're doing that from this year, but this year doesn't get reported until around about next summer. But what we should see is how we compare against the other authorities. But I'm confident that we're going to compare well. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, right, we'll move on to objective 3. I know we've got some question on the housing measures and on how education feeds into this. And I've got you down as a question as well, Rafe. I'm sorry, I can't remember what area it was on. So Rafe, you've got your hand up first. Go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Now, my question is on housing, on measure 33, which is the number of households registered with homes in Powys. This one's quite a surprising one because the data says that in Q2 of 24-25, there were 4,438 households registered. But then in Q3 in 24-25, that reduced to 3,375, which is a reduction of 1,063. But we only built, acquired, or brought back into use a total of 35 houses in the previous year, and are only on track to have acquired or brought back into use 26 this year. So I'd just like some more information from the department as to where that reduction comes from and where have those people gone. Thanks.
Thank you, Rafe. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Devlin. So the Housing Service take a proactive approach to managing the Common Housing Register Homes in Powys, which, as you know, is a partnership between us and 8 registered social landlords across the local authority area. So in taking that proactive response, there is regular contact with people who are on the housing waiting list to ensure that we are meeting need. And some people, when they find other housing options, leave the Common Housing Register because they've either gone into the private renting sector or their circumstances have changed. So of the people who are currently on the list, and there is a significant reduction because of that proactive approach in managing the housing waiting list, of the people who are currently on the list, it's about 50% of those who have been identified as the housing need. So the band 1, 2 and 3, which you'll see within the housing register policies. We operate an open list, so anybody can join the housing register for housing list. We don't operate a closed list. We think that would present inaccurate figures about the level of housing need and would enable the council to manage the housing need down. What we want to do is create opportunities for every person to have a secure home, but the list has reduced over those quarters because of the proactive approach housing officers are taking to ensure that people on the list are as identified as having housing need, and other housing options are explored for people like the private rented sector.
Thanks, Matthew. Did that answer your question, Councillor Rafe?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I might just come back in on that one briefly if I can, and then I've got one about the following measure. I understand what you're saying there, Matthew, but 1,000 is a staggering figure with the limited amount of homes we've built collectively across those housing associations and Powys this year. So I just have that worry. Is it people are dropping off the list because they don't want to come to Powys anymore and they want to go elsewhere? And is the list just not working? So they're stuck on that list for years and years and years. And eventually you give them a call and you say, do you want to stay on this list? And they say, well, what's the point? I'm going to drop off because I've been here 5 years and you haven't found me anything. So I don't necessarily need a response, but I do have some concerns about, yes, let's be proactive. Let's keep the list manageable. That's really good practice. But I'm then generally interested in, that's a big shift when we haven't built those homes and the private rented sector isn't there. So they certainly haven't moved into rented accommodation because there just isn't that level of private rents out there. My point was around the following measure, actually, 34. And actually, I know Gareth raised it and others. Good to see a target dropping because it means, you've been proactive, you've reduced the number and therefore you should reduce that target for next year. That's brilliant. But obviously still some worrying figures about the number of people in homeless accommodation or temporary accommodation that we're providing because they're homeless. But my question really was perhaps to Andy or to Matthew. How long might the average wait be in that temporary solution that we've given them? Because 10 is great, but it's 10 out of 300 odd. And that's not a lot. That's a pretty low percentage, isn't it? And I know there's challenges in getting more housing and reducing that, but what's the expected sort of time that somebody may be placed in a B&B, or isn't there one? Does it vary with every household? Thank you.
Councillor Matthew.
Thanks. Really good question. Length of stay is something that really concerns me in temporary accommodation. We are trying to really reduce, what I would like to see us do is to cease using bed and breakfast as temporary accommodation altogether, and the service are being challenged to do that. But in doing so, they're using more of our permanent stock as temporary accommodation while they undertake the statutory assessments required around homelessness. And where possible, those are then being flipped into secure tenancies for our clients. Andy will be able to give you the specific detail around length of stay. But for some clients, those are quite high while we explore their housing options. The market in Powys is limited, as you rightly said, in terms of the private rented sector. So options are limited, which is why we're falling back more heavily on our stock as temporary accommodation. And we're doing that in partnership with registered social landlords. Andy, can I bring you in just to talk about the length of stay that we talked about in our last quarterly performance meeting, please?
Yeah, can I also ask then onto that, is Andy able to answer mitigating measures that you're doing to address the concerns that you've got on here?
Yeah, no problem. Gosh, right, okay. Those who thought I might have disappeared earlier, I had to go to the loo, but I did have my wireless headphones on, so I did hear everything that was going on. So I wasn't being rude, everybody. The current average stay in bed and breakfast is 45 days. That is coming down. We try and keep people in that type of accommodation for as short a time as possible. We are using 45% of our void properties that come back to us from previous tenants, for temporary accommodation, because it is better accommodation than bed and breakfast. But that does obviously mean there's less opportunity. Sorry.
Well, can everyone make sure that they've got their mics on mute, please? Sorry, Andy, carry on.
Okay. So, you know, it does mean there's slightly less houses for people to move on to. We do have a build program now that is scheduled to build before 2031, 421 new council houses. The target was 350. I'd like to get that to be bigger. The more we can build, the better, because the root cause of homelessness is a lack of housing. One of the issues we find in Powys is that most of our homeless clients, well over half, are single people or couples, which means they're impacted by social security limitations. So, for example, the spare room subsidy or bedroom tax will apply to them. So it's why it's difficult for them to move into larger properties. Yeah, so that's one of the issues we find is moving people on. So that's the length of tier. Mitigating measures, we are building more homes. We're hoping to develop our own in-house temporary accommodation. We've got a trial scheme that will be going ahead in North Powys in the next year, to avoid having to use B&B or reduce the use of it. And we are considering looking at buying our own type of bed and breakfast as an emergency thing, you know, overnight stuff. So yeah, we are trying to mitigate it. The main thing though is just to provide more homes, smaller homes that people can afford to rent and offer security of tenure. And that's why we've got a big council house building programme.
Thanks, Andy. Councillor Gary, has that answered your question?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, my question, Chair, thank you, builds on that last point that Andy's just made in reference to Measure 28, the development of 350 new council homes, which shows that there's been no development over the last 3 quarters. But my point is, I think as this is a target over multi-years, we should have that as a cumulative target, starting in 2025, as it says, between 25 and 31.
Is that a suggestion you'd like them to consider, Gareth?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, it's not going to come as a recommendation, I don't think. I think is there something anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I think that would also apply to any other multi-year targets, Amanda.
I think we'll put it through as an observation we've made and see, because it might not work across the board for them to consider. Did anyone want to come back on Gareth's point?
We'll take that away, Chair, and I'll discuss with the service and we'll respond to Scrutiny Committee.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Matthew. Councillor Allard.
Thank you, Chair. Just a similar theme to the last one. This, I'm not a great fan of any of the objectives, but this is about really the most important one, about tackling poverty and inequity. And as the previous Prime Minister kept on banging on about, the closest thing we got to a silver bullet to deal with this is education. And again, there was a lack of stuff, measures in the objective one, but here there's absolutely no objectives around education. Before the Chief Exec corrects me, I know there have been things are going to be added, but those are around free school meals. There's nothing here about educational standards. And the Cabinet have decided to put the challenge around educational standards within our schools on the corporate risk register. Would there be relevant measures to inform the powers better on the achievements and the potential added value that can be achieved to the tackling poverty around educational standards within our schools?
Yeah, I think I would also build on that and say, what about progress? Is there any measure that could show, whether or not children in Paris are on track with making progress in education? And if is there anyone who can answer that from education here today? Councillor Matthew, I can see, you've got your hand up, but I'll bring in Dr. Richard, please, if that's okay.
Thanks so much, Chair. I think Councillor Aled makes a really important point. We do know that education is a really powerful route out of poverty. We are working at the moment on the corporate and strategic plan to strengthen the measures around education in the way that Councillor Aled has outlined. So concrete measures which relate to the ESTIM profile of our schools and the quality of teaching and learning and the attainment of young people in our schools. So school improvement will feature as part of the measures in the corporate plan moving forward.
And that will then be on the next report when we come to look at it in the future then, will it?
That's correct.
Okay. In terms of us then gauging progress, because obviously it will be a new thing on the report, within the narrative, will there be able to be some kind of explanations on historical positioning or where we're at with progress?
Yes, we can do that so that there's context for the information that we bring forward. We can also look in the way that we do for other measures in other services at benchmarking data as well. So you'll be able to gain an understanding of where we sit as a local authority in a national context.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Aled, has that given you any assurance?
No, I'd really appreciate what Dr. Richard Jones has said, and I look forward to seeing that additional information. I think is a really key issue that's missing from this the whole report. Really, is the education of our children, which is one of our key reasons for the council. So, diolch, Richard.
Thank you both. Councillor Angela.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got sort of three unconnected questions, really. So my first one is on point 028, the completing 350 new council homes. I know Andy's talked about this, but I've mentioned this before, and I do think I'm right. But this is a 6-year plan to complete these houses between 24 and 31, but we haven't broken that down at all. And I still really do believe we should be saying there's X number in each year over that period, because it's just a nil target doesn't mean anything. And I know I've said that before. My second question is about points. I've just lost the number. Bear with me. About the poverty, actually. 035 and 036. This grey data again. It tells us here that the reports will be in Q1, but we have Q1 there, and there was no target there. So do we know what that is now? We're now in Q3. If the data was late for the time that Q1 was printed, do we have that information now, and should we have it? And then lastly, there's an awful lot of narrative below these charts. Really interesting stuff going on that isn't really captured in these targets in any way at all. And I just wonder, so what do we do with that? So yes, I've read it with interest. For example, there, just to pick on one, what we said we'll do is community wellbeing, and an awful lot of stuff is going on. What's the point of it in the context of this report, and what are we to do with that now, having read it, if there is no target for it or against it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Angela. Who wants to come back on those points, please, that Councillor Angela's raised?
I think I can deal with the first 2 points, Chair, if that's helpful. In terms of the target around house building, I understand the member's point. To date, we built 118 new council homes, but that's not showing in any of the quarter. So I think that's something we can look at. I I understand the point that's being made, but it is an accumulative process over the life of the housing business plan. So it's how we align those two things. I think we can probably try and think a little bit smarter about those, and I'm happy to take that away also. But I think there is something to celebrate in building 118 new council homes to date, but it's not been reflected, absolutely. In terms of the number of children living in poverty, there was reporting for Q1 24-25, and that is for monitoring. And I challenge this all the time. Are the interventions that we're making as a local authority making a difference and reducing that number? And the answer at this stage is, I think we are making a difference, but there are so many interdependent things like UK government policy, health policy, for example. All these things are interrelated. That's why I think the Child Poverty Task Force matters. That's why I think the work that we're doing there and the action plan that we've got through the Child Poverty Task Force, it matters, and we are able to track the difference that that's making. How do we pull that through to this is another question, I think, for reflection. There is more work to do on this. We've been very successful in securing grants to help tackle child poverty, but we're not seeing the results of it yet. I think it's a longer term approach that's needed, but we do need to work with other partners too. And it has been pleasing to see both UK and Welsh Government develop plans too around tackling Child Poverty Task Force, which are very similar and aligned to the work that we're doing. So I think with all of those partners pulling in the same direction, we'll be able to make greater impact.
Angela also had a question on the narrative at the end. Is someone else able to answer that? Nina's got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Amanda, for your question. The narrative, there's a lot of narrative provided from across all corporate services as part of this process, and it's there for information because, you know, it's absolutely appreciated that the measures are a snapshot, etc. But the narrative really helps add the detail behind the work that's happening, the good work that's happening, the next steps, etc. from across those kind of actions. So it's there to provide additional information and assurance for not just yourselves as Scrutiny and Cabinet, etc., but of course available to the public as well. Hope that answers your question.
Councillor Angela, has your questions been answered, or is there anything else?
No, to be fair, they haven't, because I completely agree with what all three officers have said there, Matthew on the 2 points. But in terms of the child poverty, those are on there as monitors, and there isn't anything in the narrative underneath that explains what you've just said. So there's definitely something missing. It needs to be in the narrative, but if there is a target, it needs to be measured in some way, or there's no point in having the target. And in Nina, yes, absolutely, some of that text is the narrative behind those targets, but an awful lot of that text isn't captured in those targets. So my question, it would be useful to say, this feeds into target 23 then, because how do I know? Why am I reading it in this particular document?
It's a bit of link up,
yes, across the whole council, fantastic stuff going on. That's great. But is this the place for that to be recorded if it doesn't directly feed into one of those targets? Am I making sense?
I think the point you're trying to make, Angela, is that there's a little bit of triangulation needed between the narrative and the measures. And I think perhaps if we leave that with them to take on board, and we'll move on, if we may. Councillor Rafe, I'm just going to park you a second just because you have already had a question and Councillor Peter hasn't yet had a question. So Councillor Peter, do you want to just come in with your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. And it's to do with question or the section 37. Is there hotspots in Powys for the homeless situation? And is there opportunities for them to stay in the areas where they are homeless and not be placed on smaller communities where they take away opportunities of that community?
Yes,
Matthew, sorry.
There are definitely areas where we have higher pressures in terms of homelessness, and they do tend to be centred around the larger towns within the local authority area. Housing officers will work with individuals who are threatened with or experiencing homelessness to find the best housing options for them. Clearly, we as a local authority want to keep people in their communities where their social support is, where their jobs are, where their leisure and community interests are. That sometimes isn't possible when people need temporary accommodation. So if we are working with a client who's got significant challenges and we need to put them into bed and breakfast accommodation to ensure that they've got some secure accommodation on a temporary basis, there have been incidences where that's not in the town where they have currently been living. And that is always challenging for people. And where we can, we try not to do that. We try to exhaust every other opportunity. But if we have a empty council property in a neighbouring ward or village, and that is the best option for that person experiencing homelessness, we will absolutely utilise that asset to relieve that homelessness and that experience for the person. It is the right thing to do. But the housing options officers will work really closely with people. Our homelessness team are incredible at working with people to find the best housing options for them to keep them in the communities where they've got that support network and employment and education opportunity.
Councillor Peter, has that answered your question?
Well, yes, in a way, but I'm just interested that it does put pressures on smaller communities sometimes when placements are put within a smaller community and there's not the opportunities if someone is used to a bigger remit of a town or a bigger part of Powys, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll leave that as an observation. Councillor Rafe, I'm going to take this as the last question, please, on objective 3.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on measure 32, which is the council's carbon accounts, and it states that there has been a 4.3 million kilogram per CO2 increase in carbon emissions from Q3 in 2023-24 to Q3 in 24-25, and I'd just like an explanation for this, please.
Who's able to pick that one up? Jackie?
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Jackie.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I'm travelling at the moment, so
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor Rafe. It is a very good question. It is something that we are particularly keen to address. But just to tell you that last year, what happened was Welsh Government do tend to give us targets on this and tell us what we have to measure. One of the things they expected us to measure last year, which we haven't done before, is school transport. And with school transport, you can imagine that's quite a lot of carbon emissions. So that was the main increase. There were other areas where there were decreases. But just to assure you as well, is through the Climate and Nature Steering Group, this is one area that we are tackling on a regular basis. And this is a big part of our agenda. We will be having an annual report coming out for May, which will also show you it will break down more about where the carbon accounts are, but also give you a bit of a narrative of where we intend to work going forward to reduce carbon emissions. I would like to bring in Daniel Burgess, if I may, because he could perhaps explain to you as well about carbon sequestration and how we are looking to aim to measure that as well, and see if we can find a way of addressing that as part of our carbon emissions from our estate. So if that's okay, Chair, if I could hand over to Dan.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome to Scrutiny.
Hi. Thanks everyone. Sorry, there we are. Yeah, just to say thank you, Councillor Charlton. We are actually looking at the process of exploring our estate's capacity for carbon offsetting and carbon insetting. So the offsetting being where you're already looking to tackle carbon that's in the environment. The insetting is actually looking to tackle carbon before it's being produced from our activity. So you're all aware that there are opportunities out there which we haven't really explored to date as a local authority to address that, and the commercial opportunities that may also offer us as well. So as Councillor Charlton mentioned there, we're in the process of agreeing a work programme using some SPF funding and some feasibility work to understand actually what we can do around our estate. So woodland, for example, the greater capacity for solar energy production of some of our buildings, for example. And all this will be featuring in this to get this back on track and actually address some of those issues.
Thank you, Daniel. I think there's just been a comment in the chat that this particular measure, this is one where it would have been very helpful if there was some more narrative in the text below as to what is being done to mitigate or improve things.
Okay.
I've got
to be fair, Chair, sorry, there is some narrative in the text, well, quite a lot of narrative, but it's difficult to understand what that means. I didn't explain. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got one final question, I think, on objective 3, and this goes back to the leader's remarks earlier on about how aware he is of rural poverty and how the perception that living in a rural local authority is that we may not have the same levels of poverty as an urban authority, which is not necessarily accurate. So my question is, under objective 3, which of these measures, in your view, actually gauge whether or not we are improving in preventing rural poverty, or do you not think it's needed to drill down it in that detail? But I'm just concerned that, you know, rural poverty takes form in many different ways, whether it be financial, but isolation and lack of access to internet and services can become a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of you don't have those things, and so you're not able to have the same financial means as others. So which measures, in your view, are relevant here, or do we need some specific measures to gauge levels of rural poverty?
Apologies, I was muted. If I get heckled by a drill, I apologise. The next door, they're doing some work. It's a really good point. How do you measure rural poverty? And what is rural poverty? And poverty is poverty, whether it's rural or urban or something in between. I mean, I think there's a wealth of information around GVA, average income, household incomes. Stats Wales is stuff full of these things. Whether we need to put a specific measure within our corporate plan, I'm not sure, because I'm happy to accept advice about that and views around those issues. I mean, Andy actually, interestingly, has come up with some quite interesting statistics sort of on a sort of more general basis about the population in Paris. Paris has 4.3% of the population in Wales, but our share of Wales's GDP is only 3.16%. I mean, that sort of overarching figure gives you a pretty clear idea of you know, the productivity of the county and our sort of gross value added aspect of things, but also a clear indication of the likely average income levels, which are very, very low, we know. On top of which, living in Paris is an expensive thing to do if you live in rural areas. Sorry, there's the drill that's going on next door. Apologies.
We can't hear it. It's fine.
It's okay. Thank you. And sort of, it would be nice to have a measure which gave us a real income figure, if you like, about not just the bald figures, but actually what does that buy you, you know, in terms of your housing, in terms of your cost of living, you know, fuel for your car tends to be more expensive in Paris than it would be in more urban areas. The fact that you have to have, a great many people really have to have a car to be able to live in the county because access to public transport is so patchy. All of these things, it'd be very nice to be able to put specific figures on those. Probably not a very easy thing to do,
but also only worthwhile doing if it's going to make a difference to how you then deliver services and make improvements. So it's got to have a purpose.
Yeah, and also, of course, it will vary greatly from one part of the county to another, and within communities as well. You know, there are examples of communities where there's fairly obviously considerable wealth, but also significant poverty, and also the issue around people having, you know, maybe houses that are worth quite a lot of money, but they don't have any. They're asset rich but cash poor. That would apply to a lot in the farming community, for example. So these are not easy things to measure. It has to be
well, perhaps we shall leave it that one with you as a challenge to think whether or not it's something that should be a measure. Or
can I make a broader point? The problem, I think, the problem is broader. One of the things that worries me is that our performance, that public sector performance in general, but our performance, if you're speaking about Paris specifically, is measured against expectations. So, for example, our pupil attainment
Alid mentioned school and school performance. Well, there's an expectation that our schools should do very well because there's a perception that because we have relatively low numbers of families claiming free school meals for their children, that actually we should be doing better than we are. But no account is taken of the fact that actually an awful lot of families who do qualify for free school meals don't claim it, despite the fact we're taking a lot of actions that will make claiming free school meals easier and removing the stigma from doing so because it's anonymized. And so there's so much hidden poverty there that when it comes to judgments about how the council is doing, those judgments are skewed and maybe create a false impression because we just simply don't know enough and we are not able to drill down enough into the real situation that our population is experiencing. So it has an impact more widely than just on combating poverty. It has an impact on the way that the regulators view us and how we as members and our officers are performing in terms of delivery of the quality of our services. And this really worries me because I think and I think it would be really helpful if we could do more work on such issues as measuring real income in terms of what it buys but the cost of, real cost of living figures, not just the cost of living and going down to the local supermarket and buying a basket of groceries, but actually the real cost of living in Paris in terms of housing costs, energy costs, the difference, for example, between people living in, we have a very high percentage of detached housing. Well, heating a detached house is far more expensive than heating a house in a terrace for obvious reasons, or 4 outside walls. So all of these things are really important issues and make a huge difference to people's lives and their disposable income. Yet we don't really have a way of capturing it yet. I'm not quite sure how we go about that.
I think we'll leave that as something to think about. But thank you, leader. I think we need to wrap up because it's gone past 12, and I can see there's various people having to drop up with other commitments. Catherine, is there one final thing to add, and then we're going to come on and just summarise some of our recommendations?
Yeah, just to add on to what the leader said there then. So obviously we've got Future Generations Act, which came out in 2015, got the 10-year anniversary coming up shortly. And as part of that, each local authority has to produce a wellbeing assessment. We've done 2 so far. The next one's due in a couple of years. But that really informs not only the wellbeing plan of the Public Service Board, but it informs our own corporate and strategic equality plan. And actually that it was a very thorough assessment, which I'm sure it's available on the public website, and it's got a whole host of things in there, and our own wellbeing information bank holds the information in there. But the biggies, I suppose, to take away from this is poverty is a multifaceted thing, so it's not very easy to measure, but we do know we've got very low unemployment. People are employed, but they're in part-time roles. We've got, in terms of gross value added, we are one of the lowest in the whole of the UK. People are often running 2 cars and their house prices versus the average wage, which that information is also available on the stats, is extreme. So it's just to point out really that we've got a whole wealth of data. It's not only at a county level, but often at a lower level than that. So really to encourage people to go and have a look, and it is something that we'll try and explore, but it's not an easy one to measure.
Thank you. Well, thank you, portfolio holders and officers for coming and answering those questions. What we'll do now is we will just have a discussion amongst ourselves a lot on the recommendations that have been made to date to make sure that we've got a good note of those. But yeah, thank you for your candid responses and for answering some what I'd like to say from committee members were very good, challenging questions today. So thank you all. Gareth, did you make a note of our recommendations and or Carrie Ann or Kath, have you got a note as well?
I've made some notes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. How do we want to do this? Do you want to just have a quick summary of what you've got?
Do you want me to share? How do I share in Zoom?
I'm just conscious, Gareth, that we're in a public setting at the moment, and these may need to be amended. So I wouldn't share them. Perhaps if you
don't me to send them to yourself, Angela and Gwynda?
I think we need to make our recommendations in public. I think that's what we do. But what we need is to refine those. So
Okay.
Kath, what's your guidance on this, please?
Yes, Chair. As you say, you've got to make your recommendations in a public forum, and we will note those. So if Councillor Gareth wants to read those that he's taken,
okay, we'll do that way. Thank you.
we'll make a note.
Okay. The first one, I thought that we should recognise that there's an improvement in the data that's been provided, especially around the trends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first one. The second was more detail in the covering report around the overall trend. Yeah, James said it in his
executive summary.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that we were unclear about the timing of the review and agreeing targets for the following years. Matthew picked up around when it is. So that was just a point I picked up, and then the concern about the number of measures that didn't have targets. The point that Angela made around the grey issues. Those are the general points, and then around the individual objectives, I've got one for objective 1. And this is a point that Alan made, that the measures should be more balanced across the services within the authority, and where he mentioned HTR.
Yep.
Objective 2, the point you made about that we think there should be an indicator around the employment opportunities to adults with learning difficulties in other specific groups.
Yeah.
And then for objective 3, the one I made about the multi-year targets around council houses and the development of new houses, there should be a cumulative total. Matthew mentioned there's been 118 new houses, but he said that's not clear. I think the one that Rafe raised about, was it Rafe? Measure 33, where there's been a significant reduction in the number across, and just looking at, I can't think it was now. It's the one about homes. The number, it's where it's dropped from 4,000 something down to 3,300. So I just question of whether that's accurate data. And the last one I got is again the point that Alan made, and Dr. Richard confirmed that there should be measures in objective 3 around the education service.
Yeah, I think I'd add to objective 3 for them to consider how they look at which measure is relevant to rural poverty, or whether there's any specific measures needed to rural poverty. Councillor Allard, have you got any comments on the recommendations?
No, and I really welcome what Richard Jones did say around education. It's just about making the measures more relevant to our residents. It's fairly keep it simple almost. And I've gone back to the corporate strategic equality plan, which was looked at by the council on the same day as the budget report, so it didn't get really highlighted. That's well, I know we've looked at it in scrutiny, but sometimes you don't think about things until it's almost too late. But there are a lot of new measures being suggested that they're added. I'm just wondering how many old measures have been taken out, or are all these new measures going to be additional measures? When they're reviewing the measures, measures that aren't relevant should be taken out. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just going to get twice as many sheets of A4, aren't you?
Councillor Angela, anything on the recommendations? You're on mute, Angela.
So I would like to have something about the narrative. So if they're going to put some narrative underneath, and there is a lot of it from certain departments, it needs to be linked to each of the points that it's influencing. So otherwise, what is the point of it? And I'm still questioning that. I'm reading school improvement and learning here. There's a lot of narrative under objective 3, but it doesn't clearly tell you. I mean, they're implying it's about poverty, but I think they should have to, the officers should have to say links to,
like just in brackets after it. Yeah. Yeah. So triangulate the narrative to the specific measure. That's the
and I think that would make it really useful, because it's clear that an awful lot of work has gone into do this. You know, somebody's typed this in these boxes. So yeah, I think that would really help give the document more value.
Going back to the overarching executive summary recommendation, Gareth, I think as well within that executive summary to have any commentary on where the senior leadership team has used this report to make a difference in the, for example, you know, that Emma gave the example about apprentices, I think that was the one. So yeah, to include that within their executive summary where they've helpfully made a difference using this report. Any other recommendations from members? No. Kath and Carrie-Anne, have you got a good note of those, and are you happy with anything, or is there anything you want to clarify with us?
No, we're happy with those. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
great.
And I'll send my document to yourself, Chair, and Ben Gwynver and Carrie-Anne and Kath.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Right. Well, if we could come off public setting, please. And oh, well, just before we go, just to thank everybody again for attending, and thank the officers and the senior leadership team and the portfolio holders for all being here today. I really appreciate all your comments. And if we could go off live just to have a couple of minutes of reflection, that would be great. Thank you.